The moment you decide who someone is before the facts arrive, you stop enforcing the law and start chasing your own assumptions. Officer Carter, remain where you are. The Pentagon has requested that everyone stay exactly where they are until further notice. The unexpected transmission crackled through Officer Ryan Carter's shoulder radio as he stood beside his patrol cruiser on the quiet shoulder of a Kentucky highway just outside Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He looked toward dispatch in disbelief before slowly scanning the scene around him. 3 Air Force Security Forces vehicles had just entered the roadway in the distance. Passing drivers continued toward the installation without realizing that an ordinary traffic stop had quietly become the concern of people far beyond the local chain of command. Ryan glanced back at the gray sedan parked several yards ahead of his cruiser. Its driver, an older black man dressed in a neatly pressed navy business suit, remained exactly where he had been instructed. His hands rested calmly in front of him. His leather briefcase stood beside his polished shoes, and his expression showed neither fear nor frustration. He simply waited. Ryan had conducted hundreds of traffic stops during his career. He had handled impatient drivers, nervous tourists, military personnel, and government contractors traveling to and from the installation. Never once had dispatch instructed him to hold an entire scene because of a request connected to the Pentagon. Somewhere inside the chain of military communications, someone important had decided that nobody should leave until the verification process was complete. Ryan looked once more toward the approaching security forces vehicles. Questions raced through his mind faster than answers could arrive. Who exactly was the quiet man standing beside the gray sedan? What kind of identification required confirmation at such a high level? Why had no one at dispatch been authorized to tell him anything beyond simple instructions? The older man never attempted to interrupt the silence. He did not make a telephone call. He did not argue. He did not mention a title, a position, or a connection that might influence the situation. Instead, he quietly watched the morning sunlight spread across the entrance to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, as if he had complete confidence that the truth would arrive on its own. Ryan had no way of knowing that the most important decision in the entire encounter had already been made long before either of them arrived on that stretch of highway. It had not been made inside the Pentagon. It had not been made inside a patrol car. It had been made the moment one man chose to trust assumptions before verification. 39 minutes earlier, the morning had looked no different from countless others. Officer Ryan Carter had been assigned routine traffic enforcement outside Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, monitoring vehicles entering one of the busiest military installations in the region. The weather was clear, visibility stretched for miles, and commuters moved steadily through the morning rush. As Ryan watched the flow of traffic, one gray sedan caught his attention. He activated his emergency lights, and the driver immediately signaled, slowed smoothly, and pulled safely onto the shoulder without hesitation. Ryan stepped out of his cruiser expecting another routine conversation. At that moment, he believed he already understood the story standing in front of him. He had absolutely no idea that within the next 39 minutes, a single protected credential, one quiet black traveler, and a phone call from the Pentagon would permanently change the way he understood authority, professionalism, and the true meaning of justice. Officer Ryan Carter adjusted the brim of his patrol cap before approaching the driver's side window with the calm confidence that came from years of roadside experience. The older black man lowered the window immediately and offered a polite smile. "Good morning, officer." His voice was steady, respectful, and completely unhurried. Ryan returned the greeting with professional courtesy before explaining the reason for the stop. "Good morning, sir. I stopped you because I noticed your vehicle changing lanes without signaling for the full distance required. May I please see your driver's license, vehicle, registration, and proof of insurance?" "Certainly, officer," the man replied. Without sudden movements, he opened a slim leather wallet, retrieved his driver's license, then reached into the glove compartment for the requested documents. Every action reflected patience and cooperation. Ryan accepted the paperwork and glanced briefly at the driver's license before comparing it with the man seated in front of him. The information appeared ordinary enough, but something about the driver's calm demeanor felt unusual. Most people asked questions. Many offered explanations. Some immediately became defensive. This man did none of those things. He simply waited for the process to continue. "Are you heading on to the installation this morning?" Ryan asked. "Yes," the man answered. "I have official business scheduled there." Ryan nodded. "May I ask what kind of business?" The man smiled politely without sounding evasive. "You may verify everything through the proper channels if necessary." The answer was courteous, yet unexpectedly precise. Ryan studied him for another moment before asking, "Do you have any additional identification with you?" "Yes, officer." The man reached carefully into the inside pocket of his navy suit jacket and produced a dark credential holder unlike any Ryan had encountered during an ordinary traffic stop. There were no decorative markings meant to impress anyone. The exterior remained simple and professional. When Ryan opened it, however, he immediately noticed that the credential contained restricted markings identifying it as a protected department of the Air Force credential, rather than a standard military identification card. Ryan looked back toward the driver. "I have not seen one exactly like this before." "Most people have not," the man replied calmly. "It requires verification through authorized channels." Ryan walked back toward his patrol cruiser carrying the driver's documents and the protected credential holder. Sitting inside the vehicle, he entered the available information into the mobile computer exactly as he had done thousands of times before. Within seconds, the screen displayed a message he had never seen during his career. Protected Department of the Air Force Credential. Local verification unavailable. Contact authorized military liaison. Ryan frowned and entered the information a second time, believing he might have made an error. The identical message appeared again without delay. He picked up the radio and contacted dispatch. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I have a protected department of the Air Force credential that cannot be verified through local systems. The computer is directing me to an authorized military liaison." The dispatcher paused briefly before answering. "Copy, Unit 12. Stand by while we establish contact with the installation." Ryan acknowledged the transmission and looked through the windshield toward the gray sedan. The older man remained seated quietly behind the wheel, looking straight ahead without the slightest sign of impatience. He had not attempted to explain the credential. He had not mentioned a title or a position. He had simply trusted the verification process. Watching him from inside the cruiser, Ryan realized that this traffic stop had quietly crossed into unfamiliar territory. And although he still believed he was in control of the situation, the first unanswered question had already begun to challenge everything he thought he understood. Dispatch returned to the radio less than a minute later, but the voice sounded noticeably more careful than before. "Unit 12, we have reached the installation liaison. They are attempting to verify the credential now. Please remain on the current scene until further notice." Ryan acknowledged the transmission and placed the radio back on his shoulder. It was not unusual for military identification to require additional confirmation, but this felt different. Usually, an installation could verify its own personnel within moments. This time, even the liaison office appeared to be waiting for someone else. Ryan stepped out of the patrol cruiser and walked back toward the gray sedan. The older black man lowered the window before Ryan even reached the door. "Sir," Ryan said, "the installation is reviewing your credential. There may be a brief delay." The man gave a polite nod. "That is perfectly understandable." Ryan studied his expression for a moment. "You do not seem surprised." The man answered with the same calm voice he had maintained since the beginning of the stop. "Some credentials are intentionally designed to require additional coordination." Ryan folded his hands lightly across his duty belt. "You still have not told me exactly who you are." A faint smile crossed the man's face, not because he found the situation amusing, but because he understood something Ryan did not. "Officer, the verification will answer that question far more accurately than I ever could." Ryan stood quietly for a second before nodding. There was nothing argumentative about the response. In fact, it sounded like advice rather than avoidance. He returned to his cruiser and watched the computer screen, hoping another notification would appear. Instead, the secure system remained unchanged. Protected Department of the Air Force Credential. Verification pending through authorized channels. Several minutes passed before the radio came alive again. Unit 12, installation personnel have authenticated the credential itself, but they are unable to complete the identity verification at their level. The request has now been transferred to higher department of the Air Force Authority. Ryan frowned. Can you clarify what that means? Dispatch answered honestly. Negative. That is all the information provided to us. Ryan thanked the dispatcher and slowly leaned back in his seat. During his years as a patrol officer near one of the nation's busiest military installations, he had encountered pilots, engineers, civilian contractors, senior enlisted leaders, and even high-ranking officers. Yet he had never heard local military personnel admit that a credential could not be fully verified on base. Whatever process had begun was now moving beyond the installation itself. Outside the windshield, the older man remained exactly where Ryan had left him. He was not making frantic telephone calls. He was not attempting to explain his position. He simply opened his leather briefcase, reviewed a neatly organized folder for a few moments, then closed it again as though time itself had never become an issue. Ryan could not understand that level of composure. Most people became anxious whenever an encounter with law enforcement lasted longer than expected. This man seemed completely confident that patience would eventually resolve everything. Suddenly, the patrol computer emitted a soft notification tone. Ryan looked at the screen and saw a new secure message replacing the previous status. Verification transferred beyond installation command. Await additional instructions. Do not release protected credential until authorized. Ryan read the message twice before looking back toward the gray sedan. The roadside remained quiet, but the situation no longer felt ordinary. Somewhere far beyond Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, another office had just received a request that began with a simple traffic stop, and at almost the exact same moment, a secure telephone inside the Pentagon began to ring. Hundreds of miles away inside the Pentagon, a secure verification request quietly appeared on a protected department of the Air Force network reserved for sensitive credential authentication. There were no alarms, no hurried voices, and no dramatic announcements. Experienced personnel simply recognized that a protected credential presented during a routine civilian law enforcement encounter required confirmation through established military channels. Within moments, encrypted records matched the credential submitted from the roadside outside Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The identity was confirmed immediately inside the secure system, but the information remained restricted. Standard protocol required that only those with the proper authorization receive additional details. The verification center transmitted a series of routine notifications through official channels. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base leadership received confirmation that the credential was authentic. Air Force security forces were instructed to respond to the location to complete identity coordination. A separate notification reached the local law enforcement command, advising that the patrol officer's captain should be informed because the traffic stop had entered an interagency coordination process. Back on the quiet Kentucky highway, Officer Ryan Carter continued watching the gray sedan through the windshield of his patrol cruiser. The older black man remained seated calmly behind the steering wheel, his posture unchanged despite the growing complexity of the situation. Ryan had expected frustration by now. Instead, the driver displayed the same quiet patience that had marked every moment since the stop began. The radio interrupted the silence once again. Unit 12, Higher Department of the Air Force Authority, has confirmed the protected credential. Air Force representatives are responding to your location. Ryan immediately reached for the microphone. Can you identify the individual? Negative, dispatch answered. That information has not been released to civilian dispatch. We have been instructed only to advise you that verification has been completed at the appropriate level. Please maintain the current scene. Ryan paused before asking another question. Who exactly is responding? Air Force security forces. And your patrol captain has been notified. Ryan slowly returned the microphone to its holder. During years of working near a major military installation, he had never experienced a situation where dispatch could confirm the validity of a credential while remaining unable to identify the person carrying it. The process itself seemed designed to protect the individual until every required step had been completed. Ryan stepped out of the cruiser and approached the driver's window once more. The older man lowered the window before Ryan spoke. "Sir, the credential has been confirmed through Higher Department of the Air Force Authority. Air Force representatives are on their way." The man acknowledged the update with a simple nod. "Thank you for letting me know, officer." Ryan looked at him carefully. "You expected this, did not you?" The man smiled politely, neither confirming nor denying the question. "I expected the process to work exactly as it was designed." Ryan considered those words. "You have been remarkably calm through all of this." "Calm is easier," the man replied gently, "when everyone allows facts to arrive before conclusions." Ryan found himself without an immediate response. He returned to the patrol cruiser and looked once more toward the entrance of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. In the distance, 3 dark Air Force Security Forces sport utility vehicles had just exited the installation in a steady convoy, traveling without emergency lights because there was no emergency requiring speed. They were simply following official procedures. As the convoy steadily closed the distance, Ryan realized that whatever happened next would not be determined by assumptions, first impressions, or personal opinions. It would be determined entirely by verified truth, and for the first time since activating his emergency lights, he began to wonder whether the man waiting so patiently beside the gray sedan understood far more about the morning than anyone else standing on that quiet roadside. The 3 Air Force Security Forces sport utility vehicles continued moving steadily down the highway, their dark silhouettes growing larger with every passing second. There were no flashing emergency lights, no sirens, and no sense of urgency visible to the morning commuters driving past the scene. To everyone else, it appeared to be another ordinary traffic stop outside Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Only Officer Ryan Carter understood that something far beyond routine was unfolding. He stepped out of his patrol cruiser and looked once more toward the gray sedan parked several yards ahead. The older black man remained exactly where he had been since the stop began. His driver's side window was partially lowered. His leather briefcase rested neatly on the passenger seat, and his hands remained visible without being instructed. There was no frustration in his expression. There was no attempt to hurry the process. Instead, he seemed entirely comfortable allowing time to reveal whatever needed to be revealed. Ryan found himself studying that calmness more closely than any identification document. During years of traffic enforcement, he had learned to recognize nervousness, impatience, irritation, and fear. He had rarely encountered someone whose confidence came not from resisting authority but from quietly respecting it. After a brief hesitation, Ryan approached the sedan again. "Sir, I appreciate your continued cooperation," he said sincerely. The older man looked up with the same composed smile. "Thank you, officer." Ryan rested one hand lightly against his duty belt. Most people would be asking questions by now. The man nodded thoughtfully. "Questions are useful when someone believes the process has failed. I believe the process is still working." Ryan considered that answer for a moment. "You really do not seem concerned." "Concern changes nothing," the man replied gently. "Accuracy changes everything." Those words lingered in Ryan's mind long after the conversation ended. He walked back toward his cruiser without saying anything further. Sitting behind the steering wheel, he replayed every moment of the encounter from the beginning. The driver had followed every lawful instruction immediately. Every document had been presented without hesitation. Every answer had been respectful. Not once had the man attempted to use influence, pressure, or intimidation. Instead, he had repeatedly trusted verification over explanation. Ryan slowly realized that the quiet confidence he had mistaken for indifference might actually have been complete faith in established procedures. His mobile computer remained unchanged, displaying only the secure notification instructing him to await military representatives. A few moments later, dispatch contacted him once again. "Unit 12, your patrol captain has acknowledged the notification and is monitoring the incident. Air Force Security Forces are approximately 2 minutes from your location." Ryan acknowledged the transmission before glancing through the windshield once more. The convoy was now clearly visible, traveling in perfect formation toward the roadside. At the same time, the older man opened his leather briefcase, removed a neatly organized folder, reviewed one page briefly, then returned it without appearing distracted by the approaching vehicles. It was almost as though he had experienced situations requiring careful verification before. Ryan could not explain why that thought unsettled him more than the protected credential itself. He suddenly realized that the most unusual part of the morning was not the secure identification or the military coordination. It was the extraordinary discipline of the man waiting beside the highway. He had never asked for special treatment. He had never mentioned a title. He had never hinted that anyone important knew his name. He had simply trusted that facts would arrive before judgment. As the 3 Air Force Security Forces vehicles gently pulled onto the shoulder behind the patrol cruiser, Ryan instinctively straightened his uniform and took a slow breath, unaware that the next few minutes would quietly dismantle every assumption he had carried since the moment he activated his emergency lights. The 4 members of Air Force Security Forces stepped out of their vehicles with quiet precision, their movements calm, deliberate, and completely professional. None of them rushed toward the scene. None of them treated the roadside as an emergency. Instead, they approached with the confidence of people following a procedure they understood well. Officer Ryan Carter met them beside his patrol cruiser as the senior officer, a lieutenant colonel, introduced himself with a respectful handshake. "Good morning, officer. I am Lieutenant Colonel Michael Hayes with Air Force Security Forces. We are here regarding the protected credential verification." Ryan returned the greeting and handed him the credential holder. "Thank you for coming, Colonel. Dispatch advised me that the verification was completed through higher department of the Air Force Authority, but they could not release the identity." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes nodded. "That is correct. We will complete the final coordination here." Without unnecessary conversation, he accepted the credential holder and walked toward the older black man standing quietly beside the gray sedan. The man had stepped out only after Ryan requested it earlier, and he remained exactly where instructed, his leather briefcase resting beside his polished shoes. His posture reflected confidence without arrogance, patience without weakness. Another security forces officer activated a secure handheld authentication device connected to an encrypted military network. The credential was carefully scanned, and within seconds the device displayed a protected confirmation. The officer reviewed the information briefly before looking toward Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. He gave a single respectful nod. "Identity confirmed, sir." The lieutenant colonel closed the credential holder, took one measured step forward, and came to attention. In one smooth motion, he rendered a formal military salute. "Good morning, General Brooks," he said with genuine respect. "Thank you for your patience, sir. Your identity has been fully confirmed." Time seemed to slow around Ryan. The sounds of passing traffic faded into the background as the single word echoed in his mind. "General." The quiet man who had never mentioned his position, never requested special treatment, and never attempted to influence the encounter was not simply another visitor entering Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He was General David Brooks of the United States Air Force. General Brooks returned the salute with practiced professionalism before accepting the credential holder. "Thank you, Colonel." His voice remained exactly as calm as it had been from the beginning of the traffic stop. There was no satisfaction in proving anyone wrong. There was no desire to embarrass the officer standing only a few feet away. He simply placed the credential back inside his suit jacket and turned toward Ryan with the same composed expression he had carried throughout the morning. Ryan suddenly replayed every conversation in his mind. Every respectful answer. Every patient pause. Every moment when the general had quietly trusted the verification process instead of relying on rank. He realized that the most senior person on the roadside had also been the most humble. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes turned toward Ryan. "Officer Carter, thank you for maintaining the scene while proper verification was completed. The protected credential required authentication through higher authority before identifying information could be released. You followed the established process." Ryan nodded slowly, still absorbing everything that had unfolded. "I understand," the lieutenant colonel continued. "General Brooks requested no exceptions and no preferential treatment. He asked only that official procedures be allowed to work. Ryan looked toward General Brooks once more. The realization settled deeper than surprise ever could. Throughout the entire encounter, authority had never announced itself. It had waited quietly for the truth to arrive. In that moment, Ryan understood that genuine leadership does not demand recognition, because when integrity walks beside responsibility, facts eventually speak louder than titles ever need to. For several quiet moments, no one moved. The morning traffic continued flowing toward Wright-Patterson Air Force Base as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everyone standing on the shoulder understood that the atmosphere had changed completely. Officer Ryan Carter looked at General David Brooks with a different perspective than the one he had carried only minutes earlier. The uniformed members of Air Force security forces stood respectfully nearby, waiting for their next instruction. But General Brooks remained exactly the same man Ryan had first approached during what he believed would be an ordinary traffic stop. Calm, patient, professional. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Hayes handed the protected credential holder back with both hands. "Your credential, sir." General Brooks accepted it with a courteous nod before placing it inside his suit jacket. "Thank you, Colonel." He then turned his attention toward Ryan, whose expression reflected more reflection than surprise. Ryan took one slow step forward. "General Brooks," he began sincerely, "I appreciate the professionalism you have shown throughout this entire encounter." The general offered a warm but modest smile. Professionalism is easiest to maintain when everyone allows the process to do its work. Ryan lowered his eyes briefly before speaking again. "I realize now that I believed I understood the situation long before I actually did." General Brooks answered without judgment. "Every person is capable of reaching conclusions too quickly. What matters is whether we remain willing to let the truth correct us." Ryan nodded quietly. Those words carried more weight than any criticism could have. They were not spoken to embarrass him. They were spoken to remind him why procedures existed in the first place. "I should have relied on verification before relying on my first impression," Ryan admitted. General Brooks looked toward the entrance of the installation where military personnel continued reporting for duty. "Verification protects more than identities, officer. Protects trust. Protects institutions. Most importantly, it protects people who deserve to be judged by facts rather than assumptions." Ryan listened carefully. He realized that throughout the entire encounter, General Brooks had possessed every opportunity to reveal his position immediately. He could have identified himself by rank. He could have requested special consideration. He could have used authority to shorten the process. Instead, he had deliberately chosen another path. He had trusted the system he had spent a lifetime serving. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes completed the final administrative confirmation before quietly informing General Brooks that all coordination had concluded successfully. "Everything is complete, sir." "Thank you, Colonel." The members of Air Force security forces began returning to their vehicles, their mission finished without unnecessary attention. Before leaving, General Brooks looked once more toward Ryan. "Officer Carter, every uniform carries responsibility. Mine is different from yours, but neither one exists without public confidence. That confidence begins when we allow evidence to speak before opinions." Ryan answered honestly, "I will remember that." The general extended his hand. Ryan accepted it without hesitation. There was no resentment between them, no triumph, no humiliation. Only mutual respect built through honesty and accountability. As they shook hands, Ryan understood something that had never been taught during any classroom training. The strongest people rarely announce who they are because genuine authority does not depend on recognition. It depends on character. General Brooks picked up his leather briefcase and prepared to continue toward Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He had not won because people saluted him. He had won because he never asked anyone to. As Ryan watched him walk calmly toward the waiting security force's vehicle, he realized that the greatest lesson from that quiet roadside had nothing to do with military rank. It was that dignity remains strongest when it refuses to compete with pride, and truth becomes impossible to ignore when patience gives it time to arrive. Later that afternoon, Officer Ryan Carter walked into his department headquarters carrying a case file that no longer felt routine. Only a few hours earlier, he had believed he was documenting an ordinary traffic stop outside Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Now the same file represented one of the most important professional lessons of his career. Inside a conference room, his patrol captain was already waiting alongside a representative from the department's Professional Standards Unit and an Air Force liaison officer assigned to coordinate with civilian agencies. The atmosphere was calm, respectful, and completely free of accusation. No one had gathered to assign blame. They had gathered to understand exactly what had happened and to ensure that every documented fact remained accurate. Ryan placed his report on the conference table as the patrol captain activated the department's evidence system. The body camera recording appeared on the large display, beginning with the moment Ryan activated his emergency lights behind the gray sedan. The room remained silent while everyone watched the encounter unfold exactly as it had occurred. Every greeting sounded professional. Every instruction remained lawful. Every response from the older black driver reflected patience and courtesy. As the recording continued, the Air Force liaison quietly paused the video at the moment General David Brooks presented the protected credential. "This," he said calmly, "is where the process became more important than assumptions." The recording resumed. Everyone watched Ryan return to his cruiser, contact dispatch, and receive instructions to begin military verification. Minutes later, the synchronized dispatch recordings confirmed every radio transmission, exactly as it had occurred. Timestamps matched perfectly. Verification requests, installation coordination, higher authority confirmation, and the arrival of Air Force security forces all followed established procedures without deviation. The professional standards representative turned toward Ryan. "Looking back now, what stands out to you most?" Ryan watched the paused image on the screen for several seconds before answering honestly. General Brooks never once asked anyone to believe his word. He trusted verification instead. The room remained quiet. The Air Force liaison nodded in agreement. That was intentional. Senior leaders are trained to protect sensitive information while allowing official systems to confirm identity through proper channels. Ryan slowly looked back at the screen. This time he noticed details he had completely missed during the traffic stop. General Brooks had never displayed impatience while waiting. He had never attempted to influence the situation by mentioning his rank. Even after his identity had been confirmed, he had focused on preserving respect for every agency involved rather than drawing attention to himself. The patrol captain closed the evidence file after the final recording ended. "Officer Carter," he said, "today demonstrated why documentation matters. Cameras record facts. Procedures protect fairness. Neither one cares about assumptions." Ryan quietly nodded. He understood those words more deeply than he ever had before. The lesson had not been created by embarrassment. It had been created by evidence. Before leaving, the Air Force liaison gathered the completed verification paperwork and placed it inside a secure folder. He paused beside Ryan and offered one final observation. General Brooks asked that no special recognition come from today's incident. His only request was that every report remain accurate because accuracy protects everyone. After the meeting concluded, Ryan remained alone in the conference room for another moment, looking at the empty chair where the liaison had been sitting. He thought back to the quiet roadside, the patient man beside the gray sedan, and the long minutes spent waiting for answers. Only then did he fully understand that the greatest mistake had never been asking questions. The greatest mistake had been believing he already knew the answers before the evidence had been allowed to speak. And from that day forward, every traffic stop would begin with observation, continue with verification, and end only after the truth had been given the opportunity to arrive. Several weeks passed before Officer Ryan Carter found himself once again parked along the same stretch of highway outside Wright-Patterson Air Force Base during the quiet hours of an early morning shift. The traffic flowed with familiar rhythm. Military personnel traveled through the gates with practiced efficiency, and the routine responsibilities of patrol work continued exactly as they always had. Yet Ryan knew something inside him had permanently changed. Every vehicle he observed reminded him that a license plate could never tell a complete story, and every driver represented a life far more complex than the few moments shared during a roadside stop. The lesson General David Brooks had left behind had become part of every decision Ryan made. He slowed down before reaching conclusions. He listened before making assumptions. Most importantly, he allowed procedures to reveal facts before forming opinions. Those small changes were invisible to passing traffic, but they quietly transformed the way he served the community. One afternoon, a newly assigned officer joined Ryan for field training. After observing several routine traffic stops, the younger officer asked an honest question. "How do you know what kind of person you are walking up to?" Ryan looked through the windshield for a moment before answering. "You do not. That is why we have procedures." The younger officer waited for more, expecting a technical explanation about law enforcement tactics. Instead, Ryan continued with quiet sincerity. Every person deserves to be seen as an individual before they are seen as a conclusion. Evidence exists for a reason. Verification exists for a reason. If you skip either one, you stop learning and start assuming. The younger officer nodded thoughtfully, unaware that those words had been earned through an unforgettable morning rather than a training manual. Across the base, General David Brooks continued serving with the same quiet professionalism that had defined every moment of the encounter. The incident was never discussed publicly. No speeches were delivered. No headlines appeared. There was no celebration because that had never been the purpose. General Brooks had simply trusted the integrity of official procedures and believed that truth, when given enough patience, could defend itself without raising its voice. In time, the roadside encounter became nothing more than another completed report stored inside departmental records, yet its real impact could never be measured by paperwork alone. It lived inside the choices people made afterward. It lived inside the moments when officers paused before judging, supervisors emphasized fairness during training, and public servants remembered that respect grows strongest when it is offered before it is expected in return. Imagine standing on that quiet highway believing you understood everything about the person sitting inside a simple gray sedan, only to discover that the greatest authority present had never introduced itself with rank, status, or power. It introduced itself with patience, dignity, and complete confidence that the truth would arrive exactly when it was supposed to. Some people wear uniforms that everyone recognizes. Others carry responsibilities that remain invisible until circumstances require them to be revealed. The difference is not found in appearance. It is found in character. On that ordinary morning outside Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, no one truly won because another person lost. The only victory belonged to the truth itself. Long after the radio transmissions ended, the secure files were closed, and every vehicle continued on its journey. One lesson remained stronger than every title, every badge, and every uniform. Real justice does not begin when someone proves who they are. Real justice begins the moment we choose to discover who they are before deciding who we think they must be.